Imagine a helicopter that didn't just hover above the battlefield like an oversized dragonfly, but instead tore through the skies with the ferocity of a jet fighter. Picture a machine capable of strafing sideways, accelerating with rocket-like thrust, and carrying enough firepower to obliterate an armored column. This was the Lockheed AH-56 Cheyenne, a futuristic hybrid rotorcraft that thrilled the U.S. Army, frightened the U.S. Air Force, and ultimately became a casualty of politics rather than performance. The Cheyenne's story is one of technological audacity, military innovation, and inter-service rivalry. It promised to redefine air support forever, but instead, it became a symbol of how progress can be strangled not by failure in design, but by fear in the halls of power. When Hueys weren't enough. The Vietnam War was the first large-scale conflict in which helicopters truly became indispensable. The UH-1 Huey, with its iconic thumping rotor, became a workhorse of troop transport, medical evacuation, and rapid deployment. But as combat intensified, commanders demanded that these utility helicopters do more than ferry troops. Hueys were hastily armed with machine guns and rocket pods, pressed into service as improvised gunships. The problem was that these machines were never meant to be predators. They were underpowered, poorly armored, and highly vulnerable to enemy fire. Crews bravely flew them into hot zones, but against RPGs, heavy machine guns, and automatic rifles, they were easy targets. Imagine trying to turn an ambulance into a battle tank and then sending it into combat. That was essentially what the Army was asking of the Huey. It quickly became clear that this was not sustainable. The Army didn't just need a troop transport with guns bolted on. They needed something entirely new. A purpose-built aerial predator that could dominate the battlefield with speed, protection, and overwhelming firepower. From that realization came the birth of the Advanced Aerial Fire Support System program, designed to create a helicopter unlike any the world had ever seen. Rewriting the helicopter rulebook. When the Army issued the Advanced Aerial Fire Support System challenge, it was Lockheed, not Bell or Sikorsky, that answered the call. Known primarily for futuristic airplanes like the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird, Lockheed had never been a major player in the helicopter business. But what they lacked in rotary wing experience, they made up for in daring vision. The result was the AH-56 Cheyenne, a helicopter so radical that it seemed ripped from the pages of science fiction. It was not just a helicopter, it was what engineers called a compound aircraft. It combined a rigid four-blade rotor with short wings that produced lift at high speeds and, most strikingly, a tail-mounted pusher propeller that provided jet-like acceleration. The Cheyenne didn't look like anything flying in Vietnam at the time. With its sleek lines, wings, and propeller, it looked more like something that would appear in Star Wars than in a Pentagon hangar. And when it finally took to the skies, it flew just as boldly as it looked. The Speed Demon. Traditional helicopters were limited in speed. The Huey could cruise at about 125 miles per hour, and even the AH-1 Cobra, which had been developed specifically as a gunship, topped out around 170. The Cheyenne shattered those limits. It could cruise comfortably at over 210 miles per hour, and in test dives reached an astonishing 245 miles per hour. At those speeds, it was faster than many World War II fighters and by far the fastest helicopter in existence at the time. The key lay in Lockheed's design. The fixed wings helped carry lift during high-speed flight, which reduced drag on the rotor blades. The rigid rotor system gave pilots crisp, fighter-like handling, while the pusher propeller delivered thrust without forcing the nose skyward. Unlike conventional helicopters that tilted awkwardly forward when accelerating, the Cheyenne could surge ahead without losing sight of its target. In combat terms, this meant the crew could keep weapons trained on enemies even while sprinting forward at terrifying speed. The Cheyenne was, in essence, a machine that could fly like a jet when it needed to, but still hover like a scout when the mission demanded. It was something entirely new in aviation, a glimpse of the future decades before the future was ready to accept it. The Flying Arsenal. the Cheyenne's speed was only part of its appeal. Lockheed equipped it with a weapons package that turned the helicopter into a flying arsenal. Its belly turret carried a 30mm cannon capable of tracking targets even as the aircraft strafed sideways. In the nose, it sported a 40mm grenade launcher that could be swapped for an M134 minigun, depending on the mission. Its wings allowed the attachment of pylons for TOW anti-tank missiles, unguided rocket pods, or even AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. Remarkably, the Cheyenne could carry more than 6,000 pounds of ordnance, comparable to the bomb load of two World War II B-25 Mitchell bombers. Yet its true innovation wasn't simply in the amount of firepower, but how that firepower could be used. The Cheyenne's fire control system allowed the gunner to maintain independent control of the turret. In practice, this meant the pilot could maneuver evasively while the gunner's sights remained locked onto a moving target. In the 1960s, this was revolutionary. The Cheyenne was the first U.S. helicopter to demonstrate what we now call look-and-shoot capability, decades ahead of its time. Cracks in the dream. For all its brilliance, the Cheyenne was not without problems. The rigid rotor system that gave it such fighter-like handling also produced a dangerous aerodynamic issue called half P-hop. At high speeds, the helicopter began to vibrate violently, producing high-frequency oscillations that were uncomfortable for pilots and potentially damaging to the aircraft's structure. Lockheed engineers worked tirelessly to mitigate the issue, but materials science and rotor technology of the 1960s had limitations. Today's composites and alloys might have solved the problem, but back then it raised serious doubts. Still, technical issues alone were not what doomed the Cheyenne. Its real enemy was not in the skies but in the halls of the Pentagon. The turf war with the Air Force. The biggest threat to the Cheyenne wasn't engineering, but politics. Under the 1948 Key West Agreement, the Army was limited to helicopters while the Air Force controlled fixed-wing combat aircraft and close air support. The Cheyenne blurred this line, matching or outperforming fighters in close support roles, which the Air Force saw as a threat. In response, the Air Force advanced Project AX, which produced the A-10 Warthog, designed for the same mission but from a different doctrine. Through budget fights and political maneuvering, the Air Force amplified doubts about the Cheyenne's cost and role. In Washington, rivalry outweighed performance, leaving the Cheyenne isolated and doomed, fighting the wrong war. Even if politics had been kinder, Vietnam posed its own problems. The Cheyenne had been designed with visions of open battlefields and tank columns in mind. But Vietnam's dense jungles, ambushes, and guerrilla tactics required smaller, more nimble helicopters. The Cheyenne's speed and size advantages in one theater were liabilities in another. To operate at its best, the Cheyenne needed open spaces and long, flat clearings, luxuries that did not exist in the thick canopy of Southeast Asia. In contrast, the AH-1 Cobra thrived in Vietnam. It was lighter, simpler, easier to maintain, and better suited to the terrain. The Cheyenne was a race car in a knife fight, brilliant but mismatched to the war it was supposed to fight. Death by bureaucracy. By 1972, after years of testing, millions of dollars spent, and constant battles in the Pentagon, the AH-56 Cheyenne program was canceled. Officially, reasons included cost overruns, lingering technical issues, and doubts about its battlefield role. But the deeper truth was unavoidable. The Cheyenne threatened the balance of power between the services, and for that, it had to go. Lockheed's dream machine had flown, had fought through trials, and had shown staggering potential. But it was not the battlefield that killed it. It was bureaucracy, politics, and interservice rivalry. The legacy that lived on. The Army was not ready to abandon its vision of a true attack helicopter. Instead, it launched the Advanced Attack Helicopter program, which sought a more practical and survivable design. This time, Hughes helicopters won with the AH-64 Apache. The Apache was not as fast as the Cheyenne, nor as futuristic, but it incorporated many of its innovations. Stabilized gun turrets, advanced avionics, night fighting capabilities, and a heavy payload of anti-tank missiles, All were legacies of the Cheyenne's ambitious design. The Apache bent the rules without breaking them, and it survived the Pentagon's politics. And that's the rise and fall of the AH-56 Cheyenne, a helicopter that flew too far, too fast, and scared all the right people. If you enjoyed this deep dive into aviation history, don't forget to hit that like and make sure you subscribe.